Hey everyone, and welcome back to Ideanthro. Now, one of the philosophies that I try and apply in my work is that when there's a topic or an idea or something in this space that I'm not sure about but I know that I need to learn about, I often try and really deliberately go and find as many different opinions on the topic from as many different angles as I can and have those conversations, because at the end of it, me hearing all those different opinions, once I've heard all that, it almost cuts through the noise and the mess and it helps me make sense of the situation. And so today, we're going to do exactly that. I'm trying to make more of an effort to record more of those conversations on camera as they're happening. And that's what we're going to do. So Dan, welcome along.
Thanks, Jack.
To give some context here, so Dan Robson, we met while you were working at Healthy Waterways on a student project, but that's not exactly what we're here to talk about today. Why don't you give a little bit of context of your background and why this relates to this ongoing discussion that we're having at Healthy Waterways about how we get plants to establish and survive in bioretention systems.
Okay.
Over to you.
So I recently graduated in environmental management at Griffith University, and I did a couple of wetland subjects and hydrology, and I had an interest peaked in bioretention systems and wetlands. And as part of that, leading on from that, in my industry affiliates program, I did some work with BMT WBM and looking at streetscape bioretention.
Yep.
And my degree was in environmental management, a little bit of engineering, a lot of science, but I bring a background of being 10 years as a nurseryman.
Yep.
Or horticulturalist. So I've been growing native trees, shrubs and grasses for 10 years that get used in these systems, that get used on the streets.
Yep.
And
growing a bunch of stuff that doesn't get used in these systems but could.
Yeah, well, that's what I want, and that's one of the things I wanted to talk about. So looking at systems, now I drive around, having done the project, I see systems everywhere popping up, and what I see is, so when you look at bioretention, we look at its values for treating water, but you may see around that people talk about in the literature that it's important to have that amenity value of aesthetics and multiple uses. So it's a garden as well as a water treatment and a detention basin.
Yep.
So yeah, you want to treat pollutants, you want to slow the flow, but you also want to have a beautiful and ecologically active system.
Yep.
And I know you've had conversations about this plenty of times, about having different canopies, about having habitat.
Yep.
And yet our systems are predominantly two species.
Yep.
So I've seen this going through the FORB, the CRC guidelines, where...
And the Healthy Waterways guidelines as well.
Yeah, water by
Yep.
design.
Yep.
Recommended that you have a certain density, which I know you're questioning as well, and you tend to stick with two species, mostly in terms of nutrient treatment performance.
Yeah, and look, sometimes a lot of the guidance today will recommend more species, but there's still a bit of a history in the industry of we know lamandras and carrocks and junkets, and they're pretty safe and easy to buy. Every nursery sells them. So, and we know they'll get an approval, so they get used really, really regularly.
Yeah. So, like behind us here, we're at Woodlands.
Yep.
In Waterford and Logan, and this is what 7-8 years old.
Yeah. Okay. Let me get this right. This was the hole in the ground, like as a sediment basin when I first started at Logan in 2010, and it had been planted out. It was planted out end 2011, early 2012. So 5 and a bit years old now, because we're in 2017.
And it's mostly, what is it, Lamandra and carrocks, maybe a little bit of Kinea nodosa, is that?
There's Vaccinium nodosa in there. I can
Sedge?
see the nodules on it. I don't think there's any carrocks left in it, is there?
So it's mostly Lamandra.
Yeah.
And it's not I actually quite like the batters, they're quite nice where you've got shrubs, but if you look just in the basin, it's not the most attractive and appealing looking.
Yep.
And so, from my experience with trees, we're growing hundreds of native trees and shrubs. I know that there's certain reasons why we put grasses and shrubs in there, grasses and sedges.
Yep.
So that's a Junkets, typical sedge.
Yep.
I'm not actually sure which species it is, but it's a Junkets genus.
It's probably a Eustatus, that's the most common, right? But
and there's your
fine.
Lamandra longifolia, another very common. So these are great plants, they're behind us there.
Yep.
After a while, and with maintenance and weed spraying and so forth, they may not be as attractive as they could be.
Yep.
But there's another one that may get used. You've got a Dianella. So that's probably reasonably common.
Yeah, they're used less so now because they have this habit of establishing beautifully,
And
like
then
this one
falling
has,
over.
and then just randomly dying and disappearing. So they're not, because they're just less reliable.
Yeah, it's not my pick. What I would like to talk about is like these sort of shrubs.
Okay.
We've got mid-story shrubs.
So what have you got here? What are the options?
So this is a Melaleuca linearifolia.
Okay.
So you've got other Melaleucas in the guidelines, like ericafolia as well.
Yep.
So it's probably a 1 to 1.5 meter plant.
Yep. Is that
Very fibrous root ball.
is that a particular variation?
This one here is a very, it's called snowstorm,
Okay.
due to its flowering.
Yep.
And that's another reason I'm suggesting these sort of plants is they offer other aesthetic values of great flowering and a sort of mid canopy.
Tell you what, I'm going to grab the camera, keep talking. I'm going to jump behind it so I can come in closer and show some of this. Let's break the, what is it, break the fourth wall or whatever the word is. Okay, so what do you got?
With this plant, you got a little bit of color. You got sort of creaminess. You're going to get flowering in early spring, I believe it is, with just a flush of white. And you've also got a nice fibrous spreading root ball, and they're very thirsty. They will absorb a lot of water, which may be an issue in extended dry periods, but it's an issue with all the plants in bioretention over extended dry periods.
Yeah, but on the flip side though, if that's getting up to what, do you say a couple of meters tall?
Yeah, 1 to 1.5.
Yeah, I mean, you get a few of them in there, get a little bit of a canopy and shade the filter media. Like compared to, like you can look, if I chuck that up there, you can see all the gaps between the lomandras. That filter media in the middle of that's going to get baked and hot and lose all its water. Whereas if you had a series of these shrubs over the top of it, then you're far more likely to get complete cover. Yeah, even if it's not cover, like not cover at the surface, but cover it. Yeah. Where's my hand?
So
like a meter up.
Shading, and I've seen you talk about microclimates and all these things that grasses and sedges probably aren't going to give you too much. So that's why I'm sort of advocating for shrubs. And these aren't going to have big taproots. They're not eucalypts or ficus that are going to have big invasive taproots. So that shouldn't really be a problem.
Well, this is something that I've wondered about, because currently the Healthy Waterways guidelines talk about, just round onto myself, the Healthy Waterways guidelines currently talk about don't use trees in systems less than 700 mils deep, and part of that is, well, trees are really big in a sandy medium, maybe they're not that stable, and part of it was concerns about whether roots would get into the subsoil drains, which again, that's questionable as whether that's a real risk. But if you were concerned and you had a shallow system, say 400 mils of filter media, like this system is, one way to get around that would be to use some shrubs to 2 meters. Got many of the benefits of a tree, but if, as you say, they don't have the deep taproot, also less of the possible risks of a tree as well. So
so I think, and said it, you're adding that shade, you're having leaf drop. There's a whole lot of advantages, and you're adding a different texture. So it's not just the color. You're adding different textures. You're adding different layers. So like here, you see the layering of having plants above on the batters. And a few shrubs. So given that shrub back there.
Yeah, right.
So that's a Melaleuca linearifolia. It's called a claret top.
Okay.
It's similar to this one. It's just another cultivar.
Yep.
They look really nice. You get a flush of red, and I think they add a lot, but they're only on the batters.
Yep.
This is a cultivar Callistemon viminalis.
Okay.
It's called the Hannah Ray, and it's also a shrub, maybe a little bit taller, maybe 2 to 3 meters.
Yep.
But also the other thing with these shrubs is they're quite easy to prune back once every couple of years, and they'll take a hard prune or a soft prune. So
well, particularly Melaleucas because they coppice.
And and the Callistemons.
Callistemons will as well.
So
is that actually why these have, because like they're sprouting really low? Is that just their natural growth habit? Or
it has been pruned.
Okay.
So in the nursery we prune this as we pot them up, and so then 6 months later they'll look like this. So they've all been pruned
nice
previously.
And bushy, and they've coppiced back.
We try to train them that way.
Yep.
This also has the red bottle brush flower, being a Callistemon. So once a year you're going to have this beautiful flush of red flowers.
Yep.
Another red flowering, and the other one, this is Metrosideros thomasi. Has a lot of deep red flowers coming out, which will be in about a month's time, and you'll see these around in the gardens and the streets. And this also gets a great root ball, like its roots start exploring out to the sides.
Yeah, right. Huh.
And so a well-established plant will actually sort of raise itself up with its roots, and they explore very well. And you've got these very fine root hairs as well, which I'll come back to later. Talking about like how the roots and how the plants sort of improve the system. Another option, this is a smallish plant, but this is Westringia fruticosa.
Yep.
So it's also fairly common, and it's sort of native rosemary.
Yep. How hardy is something like? So I'm.
These
okay.
are all really hardy.
Yeah, because I'm familiar with the Melaleuca and the callistemon, seen them heaps. The last two we've looked at here, I'm less familiar
they're
with.
really hardy.
Okay.
Yeah. So you'll see these planted along the side of highways, and
Yep.
they're hardy plants. Like majority of native plants that we grow in the nursery industry are hardy.
Yep.
And this is a type of lily pilly. So this is Acmina hemilampra.
Okay.
Same sort of thing. Really strong root ball, but we'll only get to. This will possibly end up as a tree, but majority of them will stay as a shrub to 2 to 3 meters.
Yep.
So, this is its roots are starting to go around, but in a system like this, it would spread out.
Yep.
So you'll have your surface roots that will go out. And in terms of like you were saying about trees, most trees will actually throw a deeper root and a lot of surface roots for stability. So I wouldn't be too worried about that.
I'm personally not. Tell you what, now we've stopped looking at those closely, I'll put this back. I'm personally not. This is what happens when we break the fourth wall. I'm personally not that concerned about the tree roots and the underdrains, because just when we've gone out and looked with cameras, it's just not happening. They're not going in.
Well, does a system like this really have much underdrainage anyway?
Well, they've got the underdrain pipe that'll run through the bottom of it, but it's just for whatever reason. Like I know the conventional wisdom is, sewage pipes, trees just chase water and stuff. For whatever reason, every bit of research that I've seen where people looking at where the trees have gone into the underdrains beneath these systems they have not gone there. I'm yet to see it.
I would say something like a ficus, which is over there, and eucalypts will self-seed, are the ones that are most likely to do that.
Okay.
But what I'm advocating here aren't those sort of plants.
Yep.
This is a Melaleuca quinquenervia, or your typical
so that common
paper bark, which will self-seed as well. Another one I think is really good. Same sort of thing with its root ball. Lots of fine roots.
Yep.
We'll explore a lot to the side, not too deep. I'm not sure about the nutrient treatment performance of these plants, but
well, Melaleuca, the quinquenervia has got a track record, and other species of Melaleuca have been have been tested as well. So, and then some of the other stuff like callistemon, don't know. The others don't know, but
you've pointed this one out, self-seeding. Tuckeroo, Cupeniopsis anacorioides.
Yep.
And that'll self-seed because it's so common as a street tree.
Yep.
Another one, not a huge, spreading root ball, so it should be, and it's a small tree.
Yep.
Can get like maybe to 4 to 5 meters, but most likely it's not going to in a situation like this.
Yep.
Maybe in the rainforest. And another sort of callistemon or bottlebrush, this is Salignus.
Okay.
So there's other varieties of this, but this is your typical. It's very bushy.
Yep.
Multiple branches usually. This one's a single leader, the way we've tried to grow it at work.
Yep.
But adds a sort of pink flush to it.
Yep.
Which adds another aesthetic value.
Yep. I like it. And I think you made like a comment, I mean, you were touching there on the fact that some of this stuff hasn't been tested for treatment performance. But there's a couple of things, in my opinion, that we have to keep in mind there. The least controversial of these statements I'm about to make in the next couple of minutes is that the Monash Uni research says really, really clearly that so long as you have at least 50% coverage of plants that are known to do good treatment performance, it doesn't matter what you do with the rest. So on that completely non-controversial basis, you could have species. Now, Lomandra actually isn't known to perform good treatment. It just survives because it's tough as nails. But species, Junkets aren't bad for that. Caryxes.
Caryx is the most recommended.
Caryx is, it's a monster. So you could have a system that, so long as Caryx likes a fair bit of water, but theoretically you could have a system that had Caryxes in it and then cover it up with a whole bunch of other complementary planting, and as long as they have 50% Caryx and then 50% a bunch of other stuff, you get good treatment performance. Same thing because Melaleucas have been tested. You could theoretically have a system that was 50% Melaleucas and then 50%, well, we see this a lot, 50% Melaleucas, 50% Lomandra, because the Lomandra is tough as nails and gives some coverage at the lower level, and the Melaleucas get up higher. It actually would work really well. The controversial bit that I'll then add to this though is, it shouldn't be controversial, but it will be, is of course that, like any research, you're limited by funding. So Monash have gone out and done great work, but there's only so many species that they can test. There are thousands of plant species in Australia and thousands of unique species in every country of the world. of which hundreds, I would guess, are grown regularly commercially.
Yeah, at least a couple hundred in the nursery
Exactly.
industry.
And of those, my understanding is that a few dozen have been tested because it costs a lot of money to do this testing. So one of the things we've got to keep in mind is that, yeah, there's good research that says, well, some plants have been proven to be good for treatment and some have been proven not to be good for treatment. But that doesn't mean we should only consider the ones that have been proven good for treatment as being good for treatment. There's a whole swathe there's hundreds of other species that have never been tested that might be really good. And one of the ways we can approach this, what you alluded to before, can you chuck me something that's got a good root ball on it?
That's Melaleuca.
Yep. There's a few functional attributes that research has shown to be really important, and one of them you were about to go to, so I'll give you the segue here, is the root structure, fine, fibrous root structures. You mentioned this to me off camera. What's important?
You've got these spreading very fine roots. So you've got larger roots.
Let me keep going.
And you've got these very spreading fine roots.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I was going to say, we're talking about should we use just these two species, but at the moment you've got a system like this which is probably 50% with grass or is bare.
Yep.
And so 50% of it doesn't have much root growth at all. So a plant that may not be the most suitable according to the guidelines is still going to give you roots. And
yeah, this is exactly my philosophy. I would sure, best option is all plants that are tested and work amazingly, but second best option is any plant of any type, please.
Yeah.
So long as it's giving really good coverage.
So why we want roots in there is because where the root and the media or the soil interacts is a rhizosphere. That's a scientific name. And so that at that point you're going to have interaction with the microbes. You're going to have fungi. So a lot of Australian natives will have fungi associated with them.
Uh-huh.
You also have a root exudate or a polysaccharide that a lot of roots will exude that helps them in there because they're trying to catch as much water, as much nutrient as they can.
Yep.
And
so they're exuding it to make a nice environment.
Yeah.
For
so
the
directly
microbes.
along these very fine root hairs.
Okay.
And so having any sort of plants in there with these sort of root systems is going to create that environment.
Yep. And
so
there's actually really good guidance. There's a reference in Healthy Waterways Bioretention Technical Design Guidelines for research papers, and there's notes about this in the guidelines themselves. But for research papers that have looked at that and identify a few functional attributes, of which those fine roots are one of them. So yeah, so like I would be saying to people, heck, if you've got a plant that hasn't been tested before and you want an indication of how it's likely to behave, check out the functional attributes and you can have a reasonable estimate. So.
And it's also worth getting plants in and trying them. And if they fail, well, plants are failing anyway. So maybe, as an industry, people can try to experiment. And then one thing I've also noticed is there may not be the greatest amount of information sharing, and this is where Ideanthro is helping. Of one company will do a project and then that's their information, and they're not sharing what is working, what species are working, what sort of media is working.
Yeah.
And in terms of coming from a plant background with not a nursery background,
yep,
that's another thing I wanted to talk about is
I'm
media.
going to keep grabbing this camera. Yeah, so this is a spade.
So I've just taken this sample out of this system.
This is out of this system. Now I've had for years question marks about this particular system because it's so sandy. You can see it there. But yet theoretically this passed the filter media test. But it's questionable. Go on.
Well, I'm pretty sure the guidelines say that the media should be less than 3% silt and clay, or maybe less than 5%, and it should be classed as a sand according to the soil texture triangle. And there will be silt and clay within this system, within this media.
Yeah, even in that, which looks like pure sand, there'll be a little.
Yeah, but that to me looks like beach sand, or it's river sand, but it doesn't look like a great growing environment for these sort of plants.
Yeah.
So what does sand offer you? Great drainage.
Yep.
It's cheap. It's recommended if it meets those guidelines. So obviously it meets the guidelines in terms of it's having its pores, it's got its infiltration capacity or hydraulic conductivity, it's got different size gradings.
Yep.
pH, electrical conductivity, that'll all be fine. and it's going to have a lot of pores in there, so macro pores.
Yep.
What it doesn't have is micro pores, which is what these very fine root hairs are trying to get in and find.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where water is held.
Yep.
So I know you've also done some research looking at water holding capacity.
Yep.
So that's where sand like this has a very low water holding capacity.
Yep.
Because it doesn't have the micro pores where the water is, it's not adhered to, but adhesion,
Yep.
I think, of the water
Yeah,
molecules.
I always
to
get
the-
confused exactly
clay.
which one, but water molecules getting stuck to either the fine inorganic particles, i.e. the clay, or to organic matter as well.
Yeah.
That's a good segue
And
to
so,
there.
as a comparison, where I work, this is our filter media, and this is 99% organic matter.
Yeah, and of course you're using this as a good medium to grow plants, not as a medium to remove nutrients from water, right?
No, this isn't. I'm not advocating putting this into this system.
Yep.
But I'm using this to compare that. What this offers you is water holding capacity.
Yep.
Still has great drainage. Like
Yep.
The water will drain out of this really quickly. But there's other important factors when it comes to plants. Obviously pH and electrical conductivity, you want those sort of things. Water holding capacity and cation exchange capacity.
Yep.
So having fines in here and having organic matter,
Yep.
and what you've been talking about, organo-mineral complexes, which
Yep.
is what happens as your organic matter breaks down to a very fine point and then associates with the inorganic minerals.
Yep.
And also having a little bit of silt and clay, that improves your cation exchange capacity. And so cation exchange capacity is the ability of organic matter or silts and clays to hold positively charged cations within the soil solution.
Yep.
So, and positively charged cations are massively important for plant growth. So calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium.
Yep.
And they basically work by it. The organic matter and the clays will have negative charges usually, and they
Okay.
can exchange and hold on to a positive charge. And also within a clay, you can have minerals and these cations being held within the clay texture.
Yeah, okay.
So you have the clay, the micro texture of the clay will have like sheets, and it will hold water
Yep.
and minerals and cations within these sheets, and they can be exchanged. So the roots will get in there and find it when they need to,
Yep.
but otherwise it's held. And then another advantage of this in terms of bioretention, total TSS, total nitrogen, total phosphorus, we're also looking at treating metals.
Yep.
So there's metals running off the roads.
Yep.
Organic matter and silts and clays, excellent for holding metals.
Yep.
And that's those organo-mineral complexes. So
Yep.
they'll actually hold, because a lot of minerals also positively charged, they'll hold those metals.
Yep.
And keep them within the system. So
it's worth, I mean, an analogy that I was thinking as you were explaining that I think is worthwhile considering here is that if you look at the difference between the two medias that we just looked at there, that which is the sort of thing that a lot of plants will have been grown in. I mean, you said it's your growing media, so that's what this Melaleuca is. That's not the one we had out of the pot. This Melaleuca has been growing in. And so you imagine it's like a nice comfy home for the plant that it's loving. Admittedly, it's kind of, it's grown up, it's become a young adult, and it needs to leave home because it's too big for its pot, and it leaves home, and that's like the dodgy flat that it moves out into. That's terrible. No plant's going to want.
that's a hostile environment.
Yeah, no plant's going to want to live in that for long, but that's the sort of environment that maybe not that extreme. Like I really doubt that met. I mean, it wouldn't. Yeah, I'm skeptical whether that would have met a Forbes spec, but it might have. But the point is, stuff like this or similar to it, even when we do, strictly speaking, meet the filter media specs, they're really harsh environments, and even a plant that's grown lovely and good condition when you get it is suddenly going to have a pretty rough time once it's jammed into that. So,
And also with this organic matter, you brought it up in other discussions about your forms of organic matter. So labile, stable, and recalcitrant.
mm-hmm.
So this is made up of 80% composted pine bark fines.
Okay.
So, and pine bark, it's pretty hard. It's not going to break down. It's not recalcitrant, but it's fairly stable.
Yep.
And it's already gone through the composting process. So the
Yep.
leaching and the initial breakdown has started to happen. I don't think something like this is going to leach significantly.
Yeah.
It's also 20% koi peat, which is coconut peat,
Yep.
which also adds a bit of structure and texture to it. So those are the very fine sort of hair
Yeah, gotcha.
pieces in there.
Yep.
And obviously this media in the nursery, we're adding, you know, lime and dolomite, and we add fertilizer to it and things like that. This is another peat we sort of use, which is sphagnum moss, or typical peat, as known as in the garden industry. And this is probably a little bit more labile.
Okay.
But not entirely, because this is in a peat bog where it's already composted.
Yeah, gotcha.
So I'm not advocating putting fresh compost of grass clippings, you know, that are obviously going to break down and have a lot of leaching. But stable forms, and there's there's so many possible organics that can be added.
This is this conversation, like something, getting a form of really well composted organic matter that's come from, ideally from fairly solid green material. I need to figure out what the right term for this is, but essentially as you say, like bark chippings, that sort of thing. Not, for example, from vegetable scraps or mushroom compost, or animal product as well. Like not that sort of stuff, but stuff that is just good, normal compost of, if you took a shredder to the tree that's behind us, that sort of,
and you age it for a little while.
Exactly. You compost it for a suitably long period of time because it gets rid of the highly mobile labile fractions of it.
And another possibility, this is perlite, so this is a volcanic mineral.
Okay.
That's then been it's been in a furnace and it expands. So this has got great water holding capacity as well, and cation exchange. And you've got other options when it comes to these sort of things, like zeolite. Which you might see in the
and there's costs associated with some of this stuff.
So zeolite's pretty expensive. Scale. This is reasonably cheap, but maybe adding less than 1%, maybe 0.5% of something like this to a media. I think it's worth trialing.
Yeah, it just reminds me. So as we've been talking, we're trying to figure out what order I'm going to release this video in with something else I've got coming. I was telling you off camera that I met with Robin Simcock, who's a soil scientist from New Zealand, last week. And one of the things she told me about, which I can't remember if we talked about in the video, was the fact that in some of their filter media mixes that they'd used a particular type of sand that's quite available in their region in New Zealand, which for whatever reason, its properties, it can hold like 20% moisture as a sand, which is just absolutely unheard of. But it's exactly that, putting some thought into, given what we've got, what is going to hold the most moisture, but in a way that makes it available to plants, not just holding it super tight like a clay would, but also providing all the benefits that organic matter will, just for plant health and available of micronutrients and the like. So, sweet.
So, in terms of my horticultural perspective, as I've spoken to you about, there's a few things I've noticed just in observations and in my projects, that systems are designed by engineers, installed by landscapers, and the plants come from a nursery, but there's not much horticultural sort of nous goes into it. There's a little bit of, you guys end up with a lot of experience of identifying plants and knowing, but it's designed as an engineered system and not so much as a garden.
Well, and this is my philosophy, is that I don't think we need to solve the problems that you are seeing with plants looking stressed like they are in this system and the like. I don't think it's a case of us needing to reinvent the wheel. It's just a case of us having enough conversations from enough different angles to pull out all the existing knowledge that's held from different perspectives. Because often I have these conversations, go to someone who's not directly involved in this field really regularly, start the conversation. Initially they're hesitant, I don't know much about that. But as soon as we get into it, it's really obvious that as soon as they have some context of what I'm talking about, it's so obvious that they know a lot of the answers, but it's just going, just getting into that context.
And so I can actually, having seen a lot of your Ideanthro videos, I can concur with what I've seen recently of having trees in there at a decent density to add organic matter. Considering having, what was the other one I saw recently? Your fine balance. So having a little bit more of silt and clay, having organic matter, and just getting the balance right. So you're actually getting more of a soil as opposed to a sand.
It's a journey. None of this is meant to be a criticism of the current specs, because people have worked with the best information they had at the time and made the best decisions that they were able to with that info. It's now just a case of, we have hundreds of real world test cases to now take a lot of really good info from those sites and apply it back and learn from it. Which, when people initially set the filter media specs, they didn't have it. They had dozens of sites at most to look at. So it's cool. Shall
So
we?
Can there also be a possibility, and I put this up to you, about replanting some of these systems? And actually, you know, I don't think it's that expensive. These things can sell for, you know, tube stocks $1.
You wanted to talk about size of plants, didn't you? Yep.
Well, you've got so these are 200 mil. You've also got 140 mil there. So what I was going to show was, I'll show the Lamandra as well.
Okay.
A typical Lamandra tube is going to be less than this and about that big.
Yeah, if that.
So growing for 4 months in a 140 mil pot, you're going to pay $4.50
As
wholesale.
opposed to $1 to $2.
Yeah.
So you're paying
But look at it.
2 to 3 times as much for way more than 3 times the amount of plant.
And you can imagine this is it's going to need watering when it's established, but so do the tubes. So you're getting a greater value.
Is there any risk, like, do they establish any less slowly or anything because they're a bit more mature and stuck in pots, or?
They can be, but if people are planting them who know what they're doing, they shouldn't really be. Like when you plant something like that, that's very root bound. I got an older plant just showing how big it can be.
Oh yeah, it is really.
But if you're pre-ordering plants with 3 to 4 months notice, you're going to get something. This is 6 weeks.
Yeah,
Junkets,
right.
So, you know,
it's pretty root bound at the bottom itself.
but it's not too bad.
Yep.
And you're just giving it a little root tease as you plant. Like I'll do it with secateurs at work. So you slice this up a little bit, exposing the roots a little bit, getting it in there. And the advantage is you've already got a bit more of a canopy going on.
Yep. Yeah, it's going to fill out.
And you've already, it's filling more space. It's got a bigger root system. You're going to get less failure. And the other one is putting trees in. You can buy a 1.5 meter tree in the nursery industry for $16. $16 to $20.
In what did you say, in a 200 mil pot? Was that what
200 mil to 250 mil pot.
Yeah.
So they're not huge. You're not digging a huge hole, but you're getting 1.5 meters, 1.2 to 1.5 meters ready to go.
Yeah.
And if you spend a little bit more, you're getting significantly larger again. But you don't have to be spending $70, $50, $75. For $16 to $20, you can get 1.2 meter ready to go plants.
Yeah.
So these options are out there, and this cost is maybe not. It's significant, but is it as significant as all the other work that goes in? And if your end result is a better looking system and better performing system that's going to survive better, it's worth considering.
It sounds like, not that I've had the chance to test it, but it sounds like there could be a sweet spot there with using, some slightly more mature plants.
Yeah, like semi-advanced.
Yeah. Okay, is there anything else we want to touch off on, or should we call it there?
No,
there's been heaps of good stuff in this. I'm really grateful for you bringing out all the plants and having some practical stuff.
You did want me to point out, you'll probably film it on the way back out.
What was it?
So you've got a ground cover that gets to about 200 mils, a little bit bigger. It's called Myoporum ellipticum. You've also got Myoporum parvifolium. Okay. They're reasonably common in the nursery industry.
Yeah, well, I've seen them popping up all the time now. They're everywhere.
Yeah. And I'm sure you'll film it on the way back out. But the great thing about them is they will spread and cover for one plant. You'll obviously mass plant them, but they'll cover a large area.
Do you have any feeling off the top of your head how wide they would cover?
It depends on the density that you put them in.
Tell you what, let's have a look after we finish that. We'll go up there and because
they're covering a whole retaining wall there, and I'd say there's probably only maybe 100 plants put in originally, and
we'll go and see how many of them. We'll find the centres of a few of them and just see how far they've spread. So, wicked, cool. Well, thank you for the chat. Thank you for the conversation.
No worries, thank you, Jack.
Let's keep in touch, see where this all goes to from here. But it's wicked. I'm based on conversations that I've had recently. I'm now feeling just really confident that we can make some sensible changes to the filter media specs that we're specifying without any negative consequences, without putting too much organic matter in such that it leaches or anything like that. I'm feeling really confident. So these chats have been great.
And I haven't even expanded on some of the water quality testing I did in my project, so that can possibly be down the track another video.
Yeah, wicked. I'd like it. I'd love it. Sweet. Okay. Thank you, Dan.
No worries.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good time. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.